Lydia Hislop joins us, a long and distinguished career in racing broadcasting, still very much going on. Lydia, go back to the beginning though for us. How did it all start? Where did that spark of interest come from?
My granddad was massively into racing. He was a punter, not a very good one. And I used to spend a lot of time with my granddad. And so he used to take me racing to Wolverhampton, first of all, but then also when I was very young, probably starting about 10, I think we used to go to Cheltenham the middle day when there were just three, the good old. I used to go to the Queen Mother Champion Chase Day every year, and I really enjoyed that. And I sort of developed a fixation with very promising in particular, but also some other horses, and particularly enjoyed watching David Nicholson's horses as well. And my dad then used to take me to stable visits at Condicut when David Nicholson was there before he moved to Jackdaw's Castle. And that was really good as well. So I've also got a horseshoe of very promising, and I remember seeing the likes of Viking Flagship and Waterloo Boy and the Agathist, who used to nod his head frantically just the whole time, the whole duration of the stable visit. He was just nodding his head. So yeah, those were how I got into racing when I was a teenager. And the first race I remember watching is the 1982 Grand National, and of course, inevitably, I think lots of people, if they've have a winning bet first time for whatever reason, that sort of ties them in. But I had a 10 pence win on Guitar 1982 Grand National, and then I used to spend loads of time sort of recreating the national with sort of little model horses at home. Yeah, I was a bit of an obsessive.
You sound pretty hooked, but was it always the case that you were going to work in racing, in racing journalism, racing broadcasting?
No, I didn't. I didn't really imagine that I could work in racing. So I went to university and I studied English, and everybody around me was sort of getting jobs as management consultants or lawyers or all of that kind of thing. And I didn't really fancy any of that. And so I just on spec, mainly because I didn't want to leave my independent life at university and go back and live with my parents in Wolverhampton. I sort of on spec wrote to the Racing Post and Sporting Life to ask for some work experience, and the Sporting Life replied by return post, asked me down for an interview, and the then editor said to me that I could come along and do some work experience for a month, and if they liked me, I could stay for three, and I ended up staying for four, and then I kind of tumbled from job to job after that. There wasn't really much thought put into it. As I say, the initial thought was just not wanting to give up independence and having to go back home, and also trying to find some work that I genuinely liked. I couldn't have had the ambition. I kind of just fell into it by accident, really.
You do still write for various publications. I think it'd be fair to call you, though, primarily a broadcast now, a television presenter, now on Racing TV. Previously, you were on Channel 4 and the BBC. I imagine there's a very different feeling being on air on a radio to being on air on terrestrial television.
But I prefer it mainly
Mhm.
because the racing channel gives you more time to go into things in more detail. The thing that I found difficult, particularly about the BBC, was how little time was ever given to the expansion of thought. That's not a criticism, that's just the way that terrestrial television is. And I found it didn't really suit me. It certainly didn't suit my relationship with horse racing. It didn't suit me journalistically. It didn't suit me in terms of getting job satisfaction. So that kind of wasn't for me. And I didn't realize that until I did it, really. I think, I was on a kind of um, relentless step sort of towards this and that. And I didn't
Mhm.
really understand or even take a step back and think, is this something that actually will suit me and what I want to do, until I was in it, and it was kind of too late. So yeah, so then I mean it was good to have that experience. I'm not sorry that I had the experience, but I definitely didn't enjoy elements of it. I felt restricted and unable to go to certain places intellectually that I would have preferred to, and so therefore I much prefer the freedom,
Mhm.
daily racing TV, which allows you to follow stories when they happen, develop themes when somebody says something interesting, and just generally go with the flow around the larger subjects whilst maintaining the actual structure of the day. I mean, you can't ignore the 210 at Cheltenham, can you? But you know what I mean. It's
Yeah,
there is,
yeah.
you can follow things as they happen a little bit more without having to keep to a much stricter, shorter time scale. Sometimes, on terrestrial TV, I watch it these days, people are having to be sort of wrapped up before they've even got to the point. So I prefer going into things a little bit deeper. That's one of the reasons I write for Tortoise Media as well, and sort of than just sort of skimming over the surface of something. That's just the way I am, and it took me a while to work that out. But now that I have, I'm quite comfortable with it. Well, very comfortable with it.
To what extent would you say that while terrestrial television is the shop window for racing, it's Racing TV and Sky Sports Racing, the specialist channel's job to hold racing to account?
I try to. I mean, obviously, they are. If you work in racing as a journalist slash broadcaster, you're there because you like racing. It would be pretty odd if you were there and you didn't really like racing. However, part of being a friend to racing, certainly from a journalistic point of view, being a critical friend to racing, I think, is by holding people to account, asking questions. And I think that the sport comes out of that more robustly if it can answer those questions, and it's actually a good thing for the sport to be able to get a platform to answer some questions that people outside are thinking and haven't had put to it, or the people within it. And B, I think it sort of makes the sport stronger in order to be able to have a thought out position. So I in terms of what the company's strategies are, I can't really speak for them. I'm a freelance, but speaking personally, that would be my view. I think there has to be some intellectual and journalistic rigor about how you approach the sport. But the sport for me does everything. I mean, it can make me elated. It can devastate me. It can make me very angry. It can make me all of those things. And I think I'm the medium because I work for the media. I'm the person sort of between the sport and its fans, its viewers, people who follow it. And so I think that's what they're thinking. So I think it's right that you should pursue all of those different lines. I mean, if it was just being negative or critical, I think that would be a bad thing. I think there can be a lot of moaning. I mean, I think inevitably there is a lot of moaning. However, I think at the moment there's quite a lot to be worried about, to be fair to horse racing. I mean, I think there is so much in terms of, does British racing have the horses to fill some of its better races, not its very top races at the moment, but the ones that just below that level? Where are they going? Where is the talent drain? Is the system set up proper? Does the race program fit the horse population? But if we just follow the horse population, are we then on a drive downwards? There's affordability checks as well, and generally where betting sits, the amount of income coming into horse racing, all of that. I so there's loads of things that are justifiably very worrying. I mean, there's constant hum, of course, is sort of the sports welfare record and where it stands. Things issues like potentially overproduction. There are proper questions to be asked. I think the balance of positivity comes when you actually watch the races themselves and enjoy what's actually happened in the sport, because you have to come back and remember that whilst there is a huge industry around it, obviously it supports a huge number of jobs across the country, and particularly in rural areas, and it brings a lot of income into the country, that essentially it is primarily a sport. And I think that sometimes that can get forgotten. I think horse racing suffers from that niche element. So I think it's harder to get a wider audience to concentrate on you. However, paradoxically, I think like with many things, I think that could be quite a strength, because when it comes to niches, horse racing is a pretty strong one. The people who like horse racing, they really like horse racing, which is why I think the sport and those people who are decision makers within the sport should focus more on those people, the captive audience that they've got, rather than think, oh, we've got them. We've got them. They're not going to go away. We're going to look over here and try and get more people. I think they are the people we should be concentrating on, mainly because these people tend to pass on their enjoyment and their passion for the sport to other people, whether it's people they meet, friends, partners, children. You need to value those people you've got, the people who are really hugely passionate, because they're the people who will propagate a love of racing in the next generation and the next generation, and that's got to be really important.
Obviously, a topic that's been in the racing news and indeed the wider news recently is the whip review, the changes backwards and forwards and so on until we eventually arrive at this. With that in mind, though, and that idea, which sounds pretty sensible to me, to focus on the people who are already in racing, who will pass on that interest. The whip is about public perception. Do you agree, therefore, that maybe we should just give up on the whole idea, keep the rules as they are, because people who know racing know that, well, they're fine?
I think this is very difficult because I mean it is inescapable that in the previous Labour manifesto there was a line in there which said that there should be an independent review on the use of whip for encouragement. Now, clearly, Jeremy Corbyn has been replaced by Keir Starmer, and I don't know whether that would still appear in the manifesto. But the idea that horse racing can exist in a bubble and that can itself regulate in a bubble, I think, is for the birds. There are lots of questions. There's been questions in the House of Commons, questions in the House of Lords about how racing regulates itself, and quite often it is focused on the whip, but it's also looks at other things like fatalities. However, to some degree, because I don't believe or have not yet seen any evidence that makes me believe that the whip is a welfare problem, I feel that there are bigger problems that horse racing needs to get in order. I've mentioned overproduction, but there's other things as well in terms of the use of medication, and where the line should be drawn in the practice of that. And that's a worldwide conversation. I'm not just talking about Britain. I think that's quite an important conversation to have. So when the most recent review came out, they publicised this sort of consultation process as much as they possibly can, and I think they got 510 members of the responding, and obviously quite a few of those would have been, and again, this is not a criticism, this just happens when people are passionate about something, that would have been, some of those would have been encouraged to reply because a group might hold a particular point of view, probably a negative one, but that suggests that horse racing might be making the whip a bigger problem than the general public think it is. And the problem with the whip is that if you kind of move on a point that, to my view, is not a welfare issue, then what does that say about things that might be a welfare issue? That's why I feel that horse racing would be better concentrating on the things that are major issues and saying with the whip, yes, we constantly monitor it. Yes, we welcome scientific input, because there's a lack of that as well. I mean, that needs to be focused on. And, when science shows or data shows us something that we should be concerned about, we will respond to it. But at the moment, this is our position, but we constantly monitor it. That's how I would like them to deal with the whip. I'm not. When they first introduced the number, I know the number is very much hated, and I can understand why, because one particularly fierce use of the whip could be anathema, and somebody could use the whip skillfully 14 times and it might not be offensive or in any difficult for the what's the word I'm looking, evasive to the horse. So I know a number is quite a blunt measurement. However, when that number was brought in, I would suggest that the median standard of jockeyship in terms of whip usage raised massively. The best jockeys have always known how to use the whip skillfully, because if you overuse a whip, what you tend to get is a hanging horse, a horse that actually doesn't give of its best. And people talk about it in terms of interference. I think that the whip causes more interference than it averts, and it loses more races than it wins. You'll see horses drifting around, and often it's caused by either the jockey getting imbalanced and his or her use of the whip. So I think that actually the number was a good thing, because I think it improved the standard of jockeyship. You didn't get jockeys reflexively raising their arm to use the whip 2 furlongs out, because that's what you did. It required much more thoughtful deployment of it.
Good. It's a fascinating story. We could talk about it forever. But to come back to perhaps a more light-hearted question to finish up with, could you talk us through your favourite racecourses in the UK, north and south?
My favourite racecourses. Well, the first one that knocked me over was Cheltenham. Obviously, I know that Alistair Down describes it as a natural amphitheatre, but it really, really is. Just an amazing place that makes you tingle when you go there, and it still has that effect on me. I love Hexham. I just love the look of it, the feel of it is great. I really like Kelso as well. I think that's a nice place to go racing. In terms of the flat, I love York. I think York is the racecourse that does most things right, and I think that you can have a really good time in York no matter what you've got to spend. It allows for people whatever money they've got that, and they still get a good service for that money. And I think that's a trick that most racecourses do not pull off, and I think York does. The quality and for the price that you pay is really high, and it's really thoughtful, and I think it's really well done, and the team are friendly, and yeah, it's just got the right vibe. I really like York. I'm quite a fan of Salisbury as well. I think Salisbury for a smaller racecourse that's nice and fun.
Good. Well, always nice to hear some praise for the northern racecourses. Lydia Hislop, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.